just thought I'd do a clarification or an add-on. So I'm not sure I've done this in a video on the Draft Science channel. I might have done it in one of the rooms or something, live rooms, which I also do want to do. So I was thinking maybe on Wednesdays at 5 o'clock or something, I would have a science room or something and try to talk about some of this stuff with people live if that's possible or worthwhile or whatever. So anyway, there's an aspect to this whole thing of what actually creates matter. So if we speculate that there's all this noise, all this stuff moving around, what it's not doing, this gravity that's banging into itself all over the place, what it's not doing is it's not creating matter. So creating this energy that gets caught in orbits, the mechanics of that circumstance, is kind of like abiogenesis. It's kind of a special circumstance. Like there has to be a special configuration of things intersecting in a certain way that permits this getting locked in an orbit. And it has something to do apparently with heat and pressure, because that seems like those are the things that will, create an environment conducive to this creation of matter. Yeah, so who knows what that is. It might just be velocity. The Big Bang has enough velocity. It created the first constituent elements, and they became protons and neutrons and electrons. And that those are the basic constituent parts. I mean, you might say that the electrons, they say, are made out of quarks, and so it could be quarks. So whatever the thing is, that would be the first thing, the bit, and then those quarks get caught in relationships that we call protons, neutrons, and electrons. So, but clearly what's not happening is matter doesn't just fall out of empty space. It doesn't just spontaneously create. It's a special circumstance. So another part of this was once you establish the fact that you have this eccentric orbit. So if we create a mechanism that enables us to create this uneven or imbalanced orbit that has as its fundamental constituent this moving center of gravity. So again with the drawing, but I'll try to do it a little better. So it's looping like this. So I know I've drawn this, and so I might have had this in a video, but I just wanted to be sure, because this is another element that it sort of falls into my explanation. It's another part of physics that it explains, so it's sort of like a prediction. Yeah, sort of. So anyway, it's speculated that electrons move at 0.2 the speed of light. So that's 1/5 the speed of light. At their maximum speed anyway. They could perhaps go slower than that, but apparently they don't go faster than that. So the argument I would make is that if you do have something in this eccentric orbit, you can just think of a regular circle, a regular spiral, that the item in a perfect circle would spend 1/4 of its time in each quadrant. So 1/4 here, 1/4, well, half, 1/4 here, and 1/4, well, you don't need this redundancy, but you could sort of see that 1/4 of the time would always be spent in one of these quadrants. Now if we take that and we start moving it, then something less than, you have to add this other element of time. So as soon as this thing, this item, this perfect orbit starts to move in a direction, it would spend some percentage of its time in this direction. So now this quarter goes down to some other number, 1 divided by 3.99999 or something, 3.999, and the 0.99s would add up to this direction. So if you sort of think about that with the electron moving, say if the electron is in one of these eccentric orbits, it would work out to a very good 1/5 the speed of light if you thought about it moving the direction of a diameter per circle. So one complete diameter of distance, one of this amount of distance, would equal the distance in each quarter. So each curved line is this diameter, effectively. Close enough, 3.14 times blah 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 blah. You know, you do the math. Anyway, so you could see that that might be the maximum amount of stretch or maximum amount of eccentricity you could have in the orbit, or spiral in the orbit. But you can just sort of understand it by just thinking of the thing who spends, you know, it goes this way in the circle, and it goes down, and it goes across, back this way, and back up again. So in a perfect circle, the ups and downs cancel out, the left and rights cancel out. But this extra bit would be this extra fifth, 1/5 of the time, it's going an extra bit in this direction. And so that can sort of get you the idea that it sort of works out mechanically, that that would be 1/5 the time, therefore it could have a maximum speed that would be close to 0.2 the speed of light. That's when it's in an orbit. Electrons moving outside of an atom, I think, can move faster than that. So it's essentially just saying that this eccentric orbit becomes more like a little loop, long little loop, long little loop, long little loop, long little loop. So the orbit gets really, it starts the thing holding it together, the gravity or whatever you want to call it, well, it is gravity, gets weaker and weaker as you stretch it out. And if you stretch it out to the electron moving the speed of light, you would likely break the bonds inside of the electron, and the electron would just become photons moving in the direction that the electron was moving. So you might be able to think of that in terms of, you know, how much you can stretch an electron would have a lot to do with when electricity is moving through a wire, that it's effectively being stretched, that the orbit is being highly stretched. You know, there's a high amount of distance in the spiral, the eccentricity is high, so effectively it's much like just photons moving in that direction, except the photons have a little bit of still have some orbit left in them. So there's enough to hold them together, but it's hitting the limits when it's reaching the speed of light, obviously. So it's something to think about in terms of how electricity moves through wires, depending on the speed of how it's moving, would indicate that it has less resistance to movement, and that its orbit is more stretched. So it's almost like photons moving through the wire, not really electrons. So it can recompress at any point, but it's basically just electrons, photons, quanta, moving through the wire, and then it recompresses to a more normal electron at what you could call the boundaries, and that in those boundaries then it can be again converted by traveling through, ions or some other mechanism to be, that would provide a reason for it to be moved, which would be again gravity, some force of something that's blocking or obliging the configuration of this stuff, which is again just directional, collection of direction. So essentially this, you could call matter a filter for direction, in that it's causing something to only do these directions. This is the directions that will be maintained through the impacts with the environment. So it'll suck from the environment only that which maintains this orbital kind of thing because of the arrangement. So it's only filtering, so it's already, this is the first filter, would be that first orbit, because that's creating the first filtered movement, where only certain directions will be maximized through interaction. So again, through this shielding effect of shadowing interaction, you can depending on how you create this complex arrangement that creates this material thing, this capture. The capture is itself a filtered amount of direction, that only there's no this direction or that direction, there's just these specific directions, this specific orbit. And that filter in itself now filters gravity in a specific way that can cause other filtered packets of directionality to exist. And so it's really just a collection of directionality that's being collected through this concept of shielding interaction. So it's just, you're not, the gravity's there, the interaction is there to be had, but it's being shielded by the fact that something has a direction, and it maintains that direction through the properties of the shielding, the circumstance of the shielding. But it has to be a special circumstance. Not any circumstance will shield. As I stated before, if there was a collapse of gravity, the thing would spiral into the other item. So the two items could be gravitationally, pivoting on an uneven center. This is basically what's happening. Now, in a typical example, that would mean the item out here would have to be going much faster than the item close into the gravity. It would be going slower. So there'd be a speed change. But obviously there can't be a speed change if all the gravitons are stuck going the speed of light. So what has to happen is that this center of gravity essentially slides as it's to create the spiral. So this spiral is really being created by a sliding of the center of gravity between this point and this point, between these two objects that are orbiting each other. Or there could be two objects on one side and one object on the other side, as I stated before. So this unevenness is counterbalanced by a shifting of the center of gravity between these 2 points. And so that's maintaining the orbit. So essentially you could think of it like a gyroscope. There is a hardware to a gyroscope, and the same kind of mechanism might be that there's an interior orbit and then an exterior orbit, and that these two orbits are eccentric to each other, which maintains a balance in the end. So there's imbalance and another imbalance, and that imbalance plus imbalance equals balance kind of idea. So what I want to get to is, so if this imbalance gets changed, in the sense that there's not enough gravity to maintain this orbit, or these things go out too wide, or whatever happens, that would throw it, this stuff would just fly apart. And the converse, where the gravity is too strong and gets pulled in and spirals in, the impact at this center would be just the same as a regular impact with gravity. There would be no collection of density, because the two gravitons would now just collide with each other and go off in their separate direction. So these kind of degraded orbits don't lead to a heavier mass. They don't combine the masses of these elements. They would just end up being two items going off in two directions in the end. So I just want to make that clear too, that it doesn't spiral into a condensing of mass. The only way mass can condense, the only way mass gets heavier, is you have to add orbits to some element within the structure. So you have to add more, clearly you have to add more gravitons to the arrangement, to the gravitational mix, or you could have to add more packets, which would be the quarks. You have to add more quarks to have more gravity in the essence of the material of something. So it only becomes denser or more gravitationally relevant by collecting orbits. But there is no actual mass anywhere. There's no big things. They're only big in that they're a collection of a lot of little swirly things. So again, we're back to the school of fish thing. We always have to remember that even if a school of fish looks like a mass, it's just individual fish. And all of its kinetics, all of its dynamics, is the individual fish. It has no identity whatsoever as a school. It's still just individual fish. And if it hits you, it's just individual fish that will hit you. There's no collective meaning or substance. It just has individual fish in a collection. And matter is just quanta in a collection. Right. Okay, so I just wanted to add that clarification. So, until next time. I'll try to animate that. You know, but it gets... But, you know, well, whatever. I won't go into... I like the fact that this stretching spring idea accounts for different speeds of electrons. So that's what I like it for. So anyway, till next time.